Hello Netrunner fans and welcome to my review of Escalation. This is the third data pack in the Flashpoint cycle. In part 1 of this video we're going to look at all of the runner cards in the pack. Part 2 we'll look at the corp cards. We're going to start off with a new console for Anarks. This is Obelisk. It's 4 to play, it's 3 influence, it's unique. Hardware console. It gives you +1 MU. Your maximum hand size is increased by 1 for each tag you have. The first time a successful run on R&D or HQ ends each turn, draw 1 card for each card you access during that run. And it's limit 1 console per player as they all are. Right out of the pack, I'm willing to say this is the best Anarch console in print. Now, Anarchs already had a couple good consoles in the form of Grimoire and Turntable. Both those have seen a lot of play and have reasonably decent effects. This one, I think, in terms of raw power, blows those two away. Not only do you get this maximum hand size increase for tags, which especially since the printing of hard-hitting news, we've been seeing a lot more of big tag, long-term sort of tagging decks. This is going to be a really strong way to increase your hand size, both as a defensive effect against meat damage, and also just for the utility of having a bigger hand size, especially if you're using something like Wildside to draw cards. It's the second ability, though, that really makes this card. You're going to pretty easily be able to get multiple cards off of this effect when you trigger it each turn, especially given that we have some really good multi-access effects already in faction. Medium obviously comes to mind, probably the best multi-access tool in the game. And then we also have Nerve Agent, which is going to function in a similar way on HQ. And if you're using something like Faust as your icebreaker, that could potentially pay you back for all of the discards you had to do to get into the server. On top of that, we're already talking about a faction that has Data Sucker, obviously stacks pretty well with this, and I think Bagat has been really strong as an HQ pressure tool as well. You could spend a little influence and get Temujin contract in there, then you've got a really strong economy effect as well. Just generally, I think this fits in with what Anarch has been doing largely since Core Set, and I think it fits a particularly good role in the current metagame, given the prevalence of tagging. The next card is a new icebreaker for Anarch. This is Black Orchestra. It's 3 to play, it's 1 MU, it's 2 influence, it's an icebreaker decoder, and it starts with 2 strength. Whenever you encounter a code gate, you may install Black Orchestra from your heap, paying its install cost. Then it has 3 credits, plus 2 strength, break up to 2 code gate subroutines if able. Here we have the second of this line of icebreakers that install from your heap when you encounter the specific type of ice. And that effect is really strong. Like I talked about with Paperclip, the ability to clicklessly install your icebreaker is really nice, and the only disadvantage of doing that is some sort of card effect like Chronos Project. Now this is certainly not as good as Paperclip, and that's kind of predictable since this is a code gate breaker, not really Anarch's strong point. This thing's reasonably efficient against a certain range of code gates, but I think it has some serious trouble with certain code gates, especially really low strength, low end code gates. Something like Quandary is going to give this some issues. And then really high strength code gates, this is going to be very expensive to break. Now you can shore up the latter of those 2 weaknesses with Data Sucker, but you could also do that with Yogg plus Data Sucker, which I think is going to be stronger against basically everything, except obviously Lotus Field and maybe some of the very highest end code gates. I think this is going to be a decent option, maybe as a supplement to other code gate breakers, or just as a semi-inefficient way to deal with code gates that's got this nice heap-oriented thing. And I think as long as the Corp metagame stays away from heap hate sort of effects, these kind of icebreakers are going to be always in the mix because that clickless install is decent, and both Paperclip and this are good enough to see quite a bit of play. This one obviously being quite a bit worse. Next up, we have a new ID for Anarch. This is Omar Kyung, Conspiracy Theorist. He's 0 link 4512, and he's a natural. He has click, make a run on archives. If successful, instead treat it as a successful run on another central server. Use this ability only once per turn. Here's another really solid Anark card from this pack. This ability, this kind of sneak door beta sort of effect, is really, really good, and I think it's definitely worth the 12 influence. Right offhand, obviously all the successful run-related stuff is going to work well with this. Both the console we looked at earlier, Data Sucker, Begot, any sort of trigger effects that you're going to be getting on central server runs, this is going to make it easier. Another thing I thought of with this is it's going to make it easier to meet the requirement of those run on all three central type effects. So we're talking about quest completed, or maybe apocalypse or notoriety. These types of effects, it's going to be much easier to meet the requirement if you have this guy, since if you have access to archives, you can basically make a successful run on one of the other centrals as well. Speaking of archives, one of the obvious advantages of this ID is, like with noise, you're going to force the corp to defend archives a lot more heavily than they would have otherwise. So even if you don't use this ability, you're still going to force them to put ice on archives and just generally spread themselves thinner on their central servers. This is a great ID. I anticipate people building some aggressive styles of Anarks, very run-intensive Anarks, right out of the pack with this thing, and I expect this ID to see a fair amount of play. Next up, we have a new icebreaker for Criminal. This is Peregrine. It's 5 to play, it's 1 MU, it's 2 influence, it's an icebreaker decoder with 2 strength, it has credit, break code gate subroutine, 3 credits, plus 3 strength, 2 credits, and return Peregrine to your grip, derez a code gate. Use this ability only after using Peregrine to break all subroutines on that code gate during a single encounter. Here's the second of the con breaker suite after Golden that we saw in the previous pack. And like with Golden, this is kind of a mediocre version of an icebreaker that we already have, but it's got this return it to your grip to derez code gates thing. In order to justify an icebreaker that's 5 to install like this, you're going to want to have some sort of plan for returning it to your hand and using this derez thing. Now, obviously, you could use the con ID ability to help with that, but in general, I'm just very underwhelmed with that ID, and I don't know if 5 to install code gate breakers are really what we need to improve that. I'd point out that this breaker is a slightly better version of Peacock, which I don't think has seen a ton of play, but hey, if you're in a hard place with Criminal, you might as well slot that because it doesn't cost any influence. Maybe that could be the sort of decision that pushes this card into decks. It's a no influence way to break code gates within the faction, and while it's kind of expensive to install, it's reasonably efficient, and the derez thing, like I said, is pretty strong. Next up, we have a new icebreaker for Shaper. This is Houdini. It's 2 to play, it's 1 MU. It's 3 influence. It's an icebreaker decoder, and it's 2 strength. It has 1 credit. Break code gate subroutine, 2 credits, plus 4 strength for the remainder of this run. Use this ability only by spending at least 1 credit from a stealth card. This is pretty obviously good, at least in terms of a stealth icebreaker, and really the only thing that keeps me from immediately calling this great is that it's up against Refractor, which I think is easily one of the best stealth icebreakers in the game. Refractor is both easier to install since it's 1 credit less, and it's going to be easier to get up to 7 strength, which is something you see out of a lot of code gates. This, on the other hand, is going to, first of all, pump for the remainder of the run, which means that if you encounter multiple code gates in a row, this is going to have retained its strength from the previous pump. That's kind of nice. It also gets up to 6 a little easier, which would definitely see code gates at 6 strength. This also has the advantage of you're only going to need 1 stealth credit to get up to 6, instead of 2 stealth credits with Refractor, that definitely matters, especially if you're trying to play a lighter stealth setup, which I think is going to be the tendency, especially when we see some more of these cards in the pack. This is definitely good enough to see play. I think this will probably see play over Refractor based on the metagame, but the fact that it's even competing with one of the best stealth icebreakers in the game, I think is going to slot it into decks. Next up, we have a new resource for Shaper. This is Netrunner. It's 3 to play, it's 3 influence, it's unique, and it's virtual and stealth. The first time you spend at least 1 credit from a stealth card each run, place 1 credit on Netrunner or draw 1 card. Use credits on Netrunner for anything. Well, here's another sign that stealth is coming of its own and is going to be a viable way to play Shaper Breakers if it hasn't been already. This thing is absolutely monstrous. I think fills in a lot of the gaps and problems that stealth have had. The first thing to point out is this charges itself. In other words, if you spend credits from it, since it is stealth, it's going to trigger itself. So you can place a credit back on it, or you can draw a card. Now, placing the credits on it, that's really nice. Just generally being able to gather a few stealth credits for those situations where maybe you need extras is really nice. The fact that it works the first time each run is going to make you able to make sustained runs. Maybe you can spam R&D a bunch if it only costs 1 or 2 stealth credits to get in. And the fact that you can use it to draw cards is just icing on the cake. It's nice to be able to draw these cards, maybe find that missing piece of your breaker suite. This card's great. I definitely anticipate this seeing play in those stealth setups, and I think this is a card that could really push stealth into more of a tier 1 viability. Next up, we have a new resource for Adam. This is Find the Truth. It's 0 to install, it's 3 influence, it's unique, it's a directive, and it's virtual. Whenever you draw a card, reveal that card. The first time you make a successful run each turn, you may look at the top card of R&D. So the first thing to point out is this is the 4th directive we've seen for Adam. So that's going to give you some choice with your directives. We've already seen a ruling that at the beginning of the game, after you know what ID your opponent is playing, you can choose those directives. So that's before you draw your hand. In other words, this is going to give you the ability to keep one of the directives out of play. And that's kind of nice given that all the directives have some sort of downside effects. I think safety first is probably the one with the weakest upside effect, but neutralize all threats is definitely the one where it has the biggest downside. So the fact that you can choose one of those to be in the mix, I think you're pretty much always going to play, always be running, and find the truth. So it seems like the other 2 are the ones that you'd probably alternate out of play based on what you're playing against. You don't really want to have neutralize all threats against some decks, especially controlling the message, or just a deck that has a bunch of BS assets that you don't really want to have to trash. So being able to switch that out for a powerful effect like Find the Truth is going to be great. Looking at the top card of R&D, that's an effect that's really good, and it's one that I think is pretty underutilized. And just generally, I think that's going to really increase the level of aggression that you're going to have early in the game. And that's something Adam is already really good at. Right out of the gate, from turn 1, really aggressive, able to break ice, able to make runs, going to be doing powerful stuff. And this is just going to make it easier to do that. This is certainly a great addition to Adam's arsenal, and I really like the idea that we have some more choices now with how we use the directives. The final runner card in the pack is a neutral resource called First Responders. It's 2 to play, it's no influence, it's a connection. It has 2 credits, draw 1 card. Use this ability only if you have suffered damage from a corp card ability this turn. This is definitely not blowing me away, though I welcome the addition of new sort of anti-flatline tools. The biggest problem I have with this is it's not going to help you if they flatline you all in one go, like with, say, a single Scorched Earth. This would potentially help you if they scorched you, then you could use it, draw some cards, and survive a second Scorched Earth. Now, of course, that's going to be expensive. This is a 2 to install resource that's going to do nothing outside of that. And then you're also going to have enough credits floating in your pool to be able to draw however many cards you need to survive the next damage effect. This could potentially be decent against an incremental damage deck, but again, that's going to be really pricey. It's going to involve spending a lot of credits, so you're going to have a pretty robust economy in order to even consider this. I think we already have better options to deal with the current flatline tools, but maybe in the future, if we see more incremental damage things and incremental damage decks that don't tax the runner too much, this could maybe see some play. That's going to do it for part 1 of my Escalation review. Be sure to tune into part 2. We're going to look at all the Corp cards over there. Lots of great runner cards in this pack, but I think we've got some really good ones on the Corp side as well. If you like this video, be sure to give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you over in part 2.